So there was no energy demand for cars before we invented the car. There was no energy demand for computers until we invented the computer. There was no energy demand to make pharmaceuticals until we invented pharmaceuticals. The pharmaceutical industry, by the way, is a larger energy consumer in the United States than the chip fab industry, still, and may be larger in the future because of the direction of high consequence therapeutics. So if you think of that in those terms, and you would ask yourself, if we invented and built every possible thing that humans will invent and build, well, I mean, the question answers itself. It's silly to think we've invented everything. Graphene, as George and I have talked about, is incredibly energy intensive to make, but so what? Energy is abundant, energy will be cheap and free. That's not the issue. The economic value of graphene is astronomically greater than its energy cost. The same is true for silicon. But to frame it in ways that are useful for policymakers and for all of us, because BTUs are meaningless metric. In fact, in physics, they're worse than meaningless because they don't accommodate the entropic differences between different energy forms. You know, we measure everything in BTUs, and we make all these comparisons, and we make laws about BTUs. This would be like measuring everything we use in the material world in tons. We would treat a ton of dirt and a ton of gold and a ton of plastic and a ton of water the same way because they can all be measured in tons. BTUs have no meaning until you add entropy, the features that consume energy to add value, which is to strip chaos out of things and create precision, to create beauty. So that's what humans do when they invent things. What I did is thought, I'm not being successful at communicating BTUs and barrels of oil equivalent. Let's just do dollars. So, and the technology changes. So $1 billion of cars, when you build them and put them on the road, they consume about $200 million of energy over a decade. And that's true whether they're electric or gasoline. It's sort of irrelevant. $1 billion of airplanes consumes more energy over the decade they operate the airplanes, maybe unsurprisingly. Not that much more, because airplanes are optimized to pack you in like cattle. If you put this for, those of you who fly private, the number's bigger, of course. If you do $1 billion of chip fabs, apparently the people in Washington forgot that if you incentivize chip fabs, you need more electricity, but whatever, details, right? 300 million. But the interesting thing is if you build $1 billion of the digital cathedrals that George is correct are reaching their apotheosis, they really are. I mean, engineers always go too far, they always build too big. So we're at peak scale for data centers. You cannot build a data center that people will want that uses a nuclear power plant's worth of electricity. But before NVIDIA, in a data center that does no AI, a decade's worth of energy to supply the data center, the $1 billion of data center, is about $600 million. If I make some of the racks with GPUs, not all of them, then you bump the whole thing up to closer to $2 billion over a decade. So what will happen in the future? Well, George is right. We're going to go wafer scale, and we're going to distribute the power demand. The thing to keep in mind is that while we're focused on data centers, global cloud energy use, only 1/3 of it is in the data centers. The rest is in the networks themselves. 1/3 of it's in the networks, and the other 1/3 is in the distributed systems, manufacturing them and using them. So if we move to an era of greater distributed power use, which we will, and George is completely right on this because of the economic utility of distributing the power of AI into your hand, you eliminate latency. Latency is your enemy. The speed of light is fixed. So you give me inference in my hand, and Katie bar the door. This is a big, big deal. However, what that will do is distribute more of the energy use to the manufacturing of the graphene on silicon carbide. Silicon carbide, by the way, is staggeringly energy intensive to fabricate. I was party to the startup venture that created the first defect-free silicon carbide wafers. That's the holy grail for silicon carbide. Yes, no defects in it. And it's it's diamond, it's synthetic diamond. So you're putting graphene, which is perfect carbon, on synthetic diamond, which is a perfect three-dimensional structure. And this is the future, but the energy used to make these things is an order of magnitude up. We have lots of energy, but once they're distributed, we'll end up in an era which will complicate essentially the problem of control, because as you push energy demands into the system, in the network, then you have more difficulty about ordering people around about how to use it. When it's centralized, whether you're producing it, especially when you're consuming it in a central way, you can beat up in data centers. They're all genuflect to the green narrative because they're centralized.
I want to jump to data centers because they are, from a central perspective, deemed to be super important to the future of what we're talking about, what George talked about. So, Jonathan, can you talk about like using Washington, Oregon? I mean, Can you talk about the data centers and the power needs that they have for the utilities in those markets?
Yeah, it's obviously it's growing, and the forecasts are increasing because of data centers. But the important thing to remember is that the actual for the future, based on these electrification policies, it's not data centers that are driving the increase. It's electric vehicles, and especially it's converting fossil fuel heat and cooling to electricity. That's what's really going to drive. That will probably double electricity demand, and double it, the way people use electricity. It's going to double it at night when you have the least amount of wind and solar available.
In comparison, Kent, I think you said last night, you guys don't approve any new data centers. But, I mean, you're building these chip fabs, which, again, with the proliferation of technology, always requires higher energy demand. So what's the difference between those two technologies in your market?
Yeah, first, real quick, want to give some background to that. So we are roughly an 8 gigawatt system. So for simple math, it has taken us 140 years to get to 8 gigawatts of electric demand. We've accepted roughly 4 gigawatts. So 50% growth over the next several years. This is massive growth. It took us 140 years to get to where we're at. And we've been blessed with the CHIPS Act coming to Arizona, so substantial amount of manufacturing.
Can I debate the word blessed, but go ahead.
Fair. We'll hold that for later.
Well, the sun's out. That's always a blessing.
But also substantial amount of data center growth. We also have kind of paused additional data center growth in our service territory for anybody who's a site of 25 megawatts or greater. The reason being is we have 15 gigawatts sitting in queue trying to site in our service territory. That is more than double collectively with the 4 gigawatts we've accepted and then what's in the queue. Now, not all of that would clearly come to our area. It's shopping all over the nation, and that's why you're hearing a lot about kind of the power demands driven by this new technology innovation. That said, our infrastructure is not unlimited, and the infrastructure takes time to develop. In fact, it takes a lot of time to develop. And so we are in a position where we are not putting our customers' reliability in jeopardy. We need to first get where the infrastructure is going to come from, how we're going to manage that, and then also be able to plan for those needs in order to do that. So we've spun up a team of folks who are working on this specific challenge within our organization to try and find out a way that we can kind of enable customers to join in a way that's not going to jeopardize reliability for other customers or affordability.
Sure. Can you just mention, I wasn't thinking correctly, but this made sense when you said, can you explain when your peak energy demand moment in the day is? Like, when do you have your biggest constraint on the system?
Yeah. So our our peak demand is right around 6 p.m. So when the sun is setting, we have the most needs from our customers from us. At that same time, when the sun is setting, that's when we have a substantial amount of our resources dropping off as well, because we have lots of sunshine, lots of solar resources as well. So our biggest risk period really is that 6 p.m. to almost 10 p.m. right now, and anticipated to grow into the future later and later.
Okay. I want to ask, I think Brian touched the third rail earlier. We'll keep on touching it. We're in political season. It's quite an interesting one if everyone's paying attention. And this is very important for utility policy because as we go out to think about where are the energy needs, right? Those are dominantly in higher density, greater economic growth type of areas. But where the power generation comes from is in rural areas, AKA the demands are in Harris country and the production is in Trump country. Jonathan, can you, just to kind of start this, can you mention if you look at some of the mandates, like using Washington State, what would you have to do? I think it was I can't remember, solar or wind that you mentioned we'd have to do for surface area in the eastern part of this state.
Well, our analysis showed that for the amount of solar and wind you'd need about 130,000 megawatts of solar, 70,000 megawatts of wind. That's kind of the least cost mix to meet the electrification, along with about 160,000 megawatts of battery storage, which itself would take a huge amount of land area. it would require roughly 30% of the entire land area of both states. So, I'm sorry, of east of the Cascades, Trump country, if you will. And people in rural areas are really starting to resent this. They're opposing these huge developments because they bear all the costs and they're not getting into the benefits.
So let's see. What does that look like in Arizona? In other words, I mean, I live in Maricopa County. We are the meal ticket in politics today from a swing state perspective. But Palo Verde is not next to houses. How do you look at these rural power generation places in your jurisdiction in comparison?
Yeah, I mean, they're absolutely essential, right? So there is a ton of land demands that come along with some of these new types of resources, and a substantial amount of transmission then to deliver them as well.